Welcome back, AP. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flipped classroom and our continuing discussion of that Dutch Golden Age that we started talking about in class, right? So what I'm going to do really quick is I'm actually going to clip in real fast the flip that I made a couple of years ago about the Dutch Golden Age. It's just really, really good stuff, and I've been reusing it like every single year because it's really, really solid, right? And we left off talking about, though, that growing gentry class, right? It's very, very important that you actually do me a favor and you go ahead and highlight that in your notes, right? That the Dutch culture is going to be super centered around this growing class of people that's kind of like the burgeoning middle class, and a lot of other countries throughout Europe are going to be swarming and trying to get to that point, right? This middle class is very, very small in most other European countries, if it exists at all, whereas the Dutch gentry are basically the new aristocrats of the Netherlands. These people that were basically self-made, that owned land, that weren't like nobles or lords, but they actually were heavily invested in the East India Company, making their own wealth and becoming very prosperous. That's why if you actually see a lot of these old pieces of art that are actually related to the Dutch Golden Age, you'll actually see exactly what I'm talking about, which is the very famous one is the Dutch merchants painting, and you'll also notice a couple of really, really big things about them. So, excuse me. It's actually one of the more famous pieces from come from the Dutch Golden Age. Now, the Dutch merchants painting, which is actually, I believe, by Rembrandt. There we go. The Syndics of the Drapers Guild. That is them right there, right? And that was the very, very big thing that was the focus of a lot of these paintings during the Dutch Golden Age, was actually these Dutch merchants and these wealthy, wealthy gentry class of people. And it's all over the place. So something else you need to understand as well is that during this time period, you're going to see the growth of artwork during the Dutch Golden Age. You're going to see some very, very famous paintings come out by people like Vermeer, and then also Vermeer is the biggest one. The Milkmaid is one of his famous ones, and also the Girl with the Pearl Earring is one of the most famous pieces of art that actually came out of the Dutch Golden Age. And she was just actually a servant inside of Vermeer's home, right? So when we're looking at the Dutch Golden Age, it's important to understand what was going on, why it was happening, and how the money, that the actual influx of funds coming from the East India Company is going to be massively big, and the growth of the stock market is going to be really, really big in the Netherlands as well. But I'm going to go ahead and clip that in real, real fast, and then we're going to talk about a couple other things leading into the scientific revolution and talking about a project that we're going to start on Monday, okay? It's an in-class project, so don't worry about it too much, and you're supposed to just be able to get it done pretty quickly within the 80 minutes that we have. And it's not going to be a problem at all. Just go ahead and start rolling around in your mind, maybe shoot yourself into that group chat that y'all have, and start figuring out who you'd want to work on this project with. We're going to have mostly groups of 2 people. So the thing about it is we're going to have all groups of 2 and 1 of 3, okay? Or possibly 1 of 1. But of 2 and 1 of 3, make sure y'all get that handled. Get it figured out as soon as you can. But I'm going to go ahead and clip that thing in here, okay? And go ahead and finish up watching about Dutch Golden Age. And in this safe haven, in this religiously tolerant area where new companies and groups and merchants and middle classmen are taking over, look at how beautiful of a place it creates. They also expand a canal system that's over 400 miles long. They reclaim marshes to farm on. They go through a massive upheaval of good times, right? Their commercial progress is huge because the Dutch East India Company grew so quickly and got involved in that East Indian spice trade, and the profits were cornered in the shipping market. They were the largest shipbuilders in all of continental Europe at the time. And just look at the beautiful effects that it has on their country. Look at the system of canals and waterways that are built in these 12 provinces that are used to reclaim land and farm more things and give more people work and create more financial success. Fun fact, write this down. They invented the stock market in the Netherlands during this time period. That's bananas, right? The thing that we still use as a representation of economic value was invented in the Netherlands during this time. And y'all just look at how beautiful Amsterdam is. Just look at how gorgeous it is. It looks like a big box of crayons. This is Amsterdam in the evening, and you can take little cruises on boats through the canals and stuff like that. It's where Anne Frank was from. It's where some of their best artwork came out of. And I'm getting ahead of myself, y'all. But why is it looking this beautiful? Because of the commercial progress that the Netherlands is seeing, right? The Dutch East India coming around and kind of helping colonize and grow their entire areas, bringing in spices and other trade market items, and being the place that can actually ship not east and west, but north and south as well, right? They were a mecca of economic progress, right? Now, the thing about it in general, we'll talk about these guys, tulips, here in a second. hopefully helping you understand it. And the prosperity is going to drive not only commercial progress, success in the building of new cities and canals, it's also going to drive forward innovation. This right here was actually invented by Roger van der Heyden, right? So he is a Dutch scientist, and he invented longer burning wicks, and he also even invented portable pumping devices to use as a fire squad to put out fires when they would break out in the Netherlands. Look at that. That invention was inspired and paid for by Dutch merchants. It's like the Dutch had a mini Renaissance, right? A mini Renaissance where people patron these good works, right? Van der Heyden also invented longer burning wicks that could go onto street lamps throughout Holland and stuff like that, and throughout the Netherlands to make it so it would help reduce crime, right? Because you could actually see people trying to like steal or commit crimes in the night, right? And then also it's going to drive forward the growth in art. Y'all, the biggest growth in art that you've probably ever seen in a short amount of time, right? Some of the biggest ones being Johannes Vermeer, right? This is the Milkmaid by Johannes Vermeer, and you know another very famous, very beautiful, very gorgeous piece by Johannes Vermeer, and it's the girl with the pearl earring. All right, so, and literally, the girl with the pearl earring. All right, so yeah, pearl earring. Come on, where are you at? All right, so there we go. The girl with the pearl earring is one of Vermeer's most famous works of art. She was a servant girl that actually worked in his home and stuff like that. And she, well, it's definitely not that one. That's completely different. But like, it's a servant girl that worked in his home, and it's actually still housed inside the Netherlands at the Rijksmuseum Museum, which is absolutely beautiful and stuff like that. That has most of Vermeer's most famous works, and it's coming out of that Dutch Golden Age, right? It's being inspired, and like that little mini Renaissance is growing and prospering and things like that. And you're also seeing the growth of other major works of art as well, like this one by, where you at? All right, so like this one right here by one of the most famous Dutch Golden Age artists, Rembrandt, right? That right there is the Night Watch, right? The Night Watch, which I'm going to drop a video also in the description of a flash mob doing this Night Watch, which is really, really cool. But the Night Watch is a massive painting. Rembrandt's most famous work, it's 12 by 14 feet. It's absolutely massive, and it shows active movement in the movement of a militia during like the entire thing. And we'll look at it some more in class and stuff like that. But then I got one more thing to talk to y'all about. One more thing, and it deserves a title, and we're just going to go ahead and fly through it, and then we'll talk about it some more when I actually like show back up in class. Where you at? There we go. We got to talk about Prussia, right? Okay, so go ahead and give me a title, okay? And it says Prussia at the top of it, right? P-R-U-S-S-I-A, all right? So now, the big thing you need to understand about Prussia is that they are going to leave a massive impact going forward on the progression of European history. So something that you need to understand about them, too, is that they get on the absolutist train as well. But Mr. Terry, why are we talking about them after the Dutch and after the Dutch Netherlands and after the Dutch Golden Age and stuff like that? Because they're a little bit like Russia in the sense that they got into absolutism a little bit late. Well, now some of y'all are like, well, I thought Ivan Terrible was the first absolutist. He is. But what I meant is more like Peter the Great absolutist era, right? So Prussia comes along, spelled P-R-U-S-S-I-A. They are basically baby Germany. And their first absolutist king is a man by the name of Frederick William the First. Now, really quickly, okay, let's talk about his last name. Write his last name down because this family in Prussia will rule over not only Prussia but also other German-speaking states going forward for a huge amount of time. His last name is, spell it like this, Hohenzollern, Hohenzollern, right? Now, really quickly, how did this guy come to power? Well, a lot of it has to do with his grandfather, right? His grandfather was one of those 7 electors, okay? The 7 electors that picked the Holy Roman Emperor and stuff. But after the waning of the 30 Years' War and when it was coming to an end and people were realizing that the Holy Roman Emperor didn't have as much power, he is going to use his power as an elector to grow his lands and things like that. And he is originally from a place called Brandenburg, and then Prussia was an area that was out towards Poland. So he actually uses marriages of convenience to create a system where Prussia is created officially on the map, right? Now, their first absolutist king that comes along, though, is this man right here, Frederick William or Frederick Wilhelm I, also known as the Soldatenkönig, right? The soldier's king, all right? So he is their first absolutist, and the biggest thing he has to deal with is just like every absolutist that comes along, his nobles, right? When he comes to power, he has to deal with these people called the Junkers, right? And Junkers, spelled Junkers, are Prussian nobles. Just like we got boyars over in Russia, we got robe and swords over in France, and we got also, what we got? Oh, we got all these like lords as well over in England, right? But the Junkers out in Prussia are going to refuse to enact some initiatives by him, so he's going to figure this whole thing out. Some big initiatives that he wants to do, like for example, he wants to grow wealth, he wants to grow infrastructure, he wants to create more roads, he wants to increase taxes and stuff to do this. Well, the Junkers begin to refuse him, right? So his solution, I'll make more money in a different way. Instead of listening to you and taxing you more, how about I blow these doors wide open? And I allow any Protestant, any Catholic, any person of any religion to immigrate into Prussia and bring their money with them. Just like the Dutch did, right? And remember how many people are moving all over Europe trying to find safe haven during this time period. You got Huguenots coming from France after the Edict of Nantes was revoked by Louis XIV. You got Calvinists coming from Switzerland. You got Puritans bebopping around all over the place, right? So he opens those doors wide open and says, y'all, religious tolerance. Come here, bring your money, bring your business. I'll tax y'all instead. So yeah, and they come happily seeking safe haven, right? He begins to tax them, and what does he use it to do? Create the biggest military that the German-speaking people have ever seen. Something you need to understand about Frederick William, the reason why he's called the Soldatenkönig is because it means the soldier king, right? He creates a military state devoid of any parliament or local self-government, and he becomes the chief absolutist and the leader of the military, right? He uses the size and breadth of the Prussian military to create a system known as Prussian militarism, right? He elects Junkers as military officers. Those serving nobles outranked non-serving nobles. Absolute genius. If you were a noble that served in the military underneath the Soldatenkönig, it was his form of the table of ranks. You were doing something for him, so you moved up in the ranks, right? And so non-serving nobles that didn't serve in the military, you didn't get listened to anymore. And it's the same for citizens as well. If you, were just a regular person, if Katie Scuderi served in the Prussian military, she was ranked above other ones who did not, right? He creates a Prussian military state. And write that down really quick, militarism. He actually kind of creates the idea of this very intense Prussian military state. He had the 12th largest population and the 4th largest army. And not just the largest by size, but the largest in height as well, right? That right there is known as a Potsdam giant. He actually created an entire sector of the military that had soldiers that were all over 6 feet tall. He dressed them fantastically in great uniforms, gave them standard issue military weapons, and gave them really tall hats too that made them look even bigger in battle. So going into it though as well, you have to understand he had the 12th largest population in all of Soldatenkönig. After his grandfather creates this system and kind of gives him the power and land, he has the 12th largest population, but the 4th largest army, right? An 80,000 standing army at all times, right? But being the 12th biggest country in the entire area. That's huge, right? So he creates a huge military system, and we see German militarism showing up, right? Because he is a German-speaking person, and he shows up, and there are all these slogans that start popping up about Prussia. There are sayings about them that start running around Europe about Prussians and how much they love their military. And for example, they always used to say, Prussia is not a state that has an army. They're an army that happens to have a state. And my favorite one is what Napoleon said about them. Long after this, over 100 years later, Napoleon would say that Prussia hatched out of a cannonball, right? That is very important, and that is the absolutism unit, y'all. Y'all have a good one. Enjoy yourselves. I'll talk to y'all soon. Exactly, right? Very, very nice. Thank y'all so much for watching that. But now what we're getting into is the start of our next giant theme, our next giant thing that we're going forward with. And we're going to basically be jumping all the way backwards from where we talked about the rise of the Dutch, right? The rise of the Prussians. And now we're going to be getting into the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. So the unit that we're about to actually discuss is the one that was happening in the background, parallel to the era of absolutism. This entire unit is going to start right around 1550 and is going to keep going forward all the way up until the 1700s. Now, the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment are two things that heavily affect one another. You have to understand that the scientific revolution is going to come off the heels of the Renaissance, whereas humanist thought is going to continue to grow, and it's going to begin to affect the fields of science and study and experimentation and observation, and it's going to begin to grow and prosper itself into actually designing experimental models to answer real big questions that those humanists had. Rather than just necessarily making a lot of artwork, the scientific revolution is going to encompass a lot of new ideas when it comes to astronomy, medicine, and even the natural sciences, including as well as the forces of gravity and then also mathematics, all right? And then even also you're going to have one guy that's going to argue his own existence. Now, something we need to understand about this, though, is that we're going to start off with that scientific revolution, okay? And then we'll talk about how the scientific revolution and its models of questioning will lead directly into the Enlightenment. Now, the scientific revolution focuses itself on the roots of where it actually comes from. You have to understand it all comes from these early natural scientists and philosophers. So the ancient philosophers, just like the humanists of the Renaissance, actually reference people like Livy, Titus, of like Epicurean, like Ovid, and people like that were actually these early Roman and Greek historians and Roman and Greek writers that were your early humanists. There also were early Greek and Roman scientists that actually a lot of our science during the Middle Ages is going to be based off of. And we refer to these ancients as kind of like the natural scientists or the natural philosophers. Natural philosophy is the study of the natural world and earth, which is the precursor to modern science. Something we need to understand about the couple of people that we're about to talk about right now, which includes Archimedes, Ptolemy, and Aristotle. These guys did not have advanced technology nor advanced experimental models. They just based all of the things they knew off pure observation, okay? So when we're looking at it, of course, Aristotle, Archimedes, and Ptolemy, the thing that we need to understand about these three guys, and by the way, Ptolemy, most of his famous things are actually written down in this thing called the Amalgast. Now, so something we need to understand about them is they based almost 90% of the things that they believed off of simple understanding of like looking at something and observing it and trying to figure out what it's telling them. Now, for example, Archimedes is actually one of the most advanced of the three. Now, if you're actually looking at the progression of time, it goes Aristotle, Ptolemy, and Archimedes. Now, Archimedes made huge leaps forward in trying to figure out mathematics, trying to find the area of parabolas, trying to understand complex shapes. He apparently actually even died, right? Like, so his later in life, he died because a Roman soldier was coming to attack him because he actually lived in the Hellenistic world. Archimedes actually apparently lived in Alexandria, Egypt, and when it was being sacked by the ancient Romans, he apparently was working on trying to figure out the area of circles, right? And can you actually make a perfect circle? And he was literally working on this, and a Roman soldier ran into his apartment, and he literally said, "Stop, stop, stop! Don't disturb my circles," right? And then the Roman literally proceeded to stab him and then throw him off a balcony. So the thing about Archimedes, though, he's a fabulous scientist and mathematician for his era. And he actually, out of these three, was the most advanced. And so when we're looking at him as well, he also came up with a heat ray that was used to what could have possibly been used to refract sunlight and set fires onto boats. He came up with cranes that were operated by simple pulleys. He also figured out laws on density, and he's also very famous for yelling and screaming that phrase "Eureka" after he jumped up out of a bathtub because he figured out water displacement by density of an object will actually change the amount of water it displaces, because he got into a bathtub and he was trying to solve this whole thing about a crown, and literally the water he displaces was "I got it!" and he jumped up out of the bathtub and ran through the streets of Alexandria naked, screaming "Eureka, Eureka, Eureka, I have it." So Archimedes being the most advanced out of the three, and then Aristotle being the father of natural science and philosophy. Now, Aristotle is important to talk about at this point, because as a natural philosopher, he believed in something that most of these three believed in. He did believe that the earth was a sphere. He was pretty confident about that. He did not believe that it was flat. Ptolemy actually completely disproved the idea of a flat earth right around 150 AD, when he actually used his geometry and then also his map making skills to prove the fact that there's no way that the earth was flat, that it was actually a round sphere. But the big thing that the three of these guys would also always kind of ask themselves is, what about the Earth's place in the universe? Well, Aristotle, much like these other three, believed in this concept of geocentrism. They believed that the Earth was actually in the middle of the solar system and that all the other planets went around it, right? And that geocentric model is going to be the prevailing method, and we don't blame Aristotle for this because he didn't have advanced technology like telescopes or other kinds of tools to figure this out, okay? And then also Ptolemy is going to come along, and he's going to then, of course, push it forward a little bit, and he's going to introduce this idea of these things called epicycles to it. He also believed that there was actually the circle, or the Earth was set inside of one giant sphere itself. He actually believed that the entire exterior of space was its own black sphere, and that the holes that actually were poked in the outside of it were shining through from heaven, and that was what made the stars, okay? Now, there was a thing that Ptolemy, though, actually tried to figure out. He tried to figure out, but why do the planets seem to have this odd movement? Something that y'all need to kind of get comfortable with really quick is the thing that the natural philosophers, people like Ptolemy, Archimedes, and Aristotle struggled with, was explaining this stuff called retrograde motion, okay? Now, so you'll hear sometimes, for example, astrologists will talk about how, something is in retrograde, it's going to affect you personally. You have to understand it's an illusion, okay? And we're going to talk more about it whenever y'all start your project and stuff like that. But retrograde motion is the perceived reverse movement of a planet, but it actually is an illusion due to the fact that the sun is actually casting the image further out into space, okay? So something we need to understand is that when you look at the movement of Mercury, for example, it almost for some parts of the year looks like it moves backwards, and it actually doesn't, right? So it's just an optical illusion. Well, they actually try to come up with, it is, it is, it's not real.
Well, listen, the next time Matt are using Gatorade, you will have a...
In Gatorade?
Matt are using Gatorade. That's something else you could maybe look into.
Maters and Gatorade?
Yeah, sure.
Gatorade. So, yeah.
Why are you telling them it's not possibly real?
Retrograde is not real.
But what if it feels real?
It's not real, though. Sorry, my wife thinks it's real. It's, yes.
Well,
You do think it's real. That's not a knock on you, but you think that retrograde motion's a thing that affects, like, your person and your feelings and stuff.
I just make different decisions during that time period.
She apparently makes very different decisions during that time period. Now, the big thing about it, though, is it's not actually a perceived motion. The planets aren't moving backwards or anything. But what Ptolemy tried to come up with to try and explain that is going to be an enduring concept called epicycles, right? Where he actually believed that on the orbits that the actual planets are moving on their own orbit as well. So that while they were going around the Earth, they were also going on their own little circle also. So something that you have to understand is that these ancient scientists also believed that everything outside of Earth was made of perfect matter, right? They thought that was kind of like the beginning of heaven, that all things that moved around out there were made of perfect matter, right? Perfect spheres, nothing chaotic, nothing unstructured, that everything would stay the same, and that was the beginning of heaven, just right outside of Earth. So when we're looking at this is going to be the prevailing ideals throughout the entirety of the Middle Ages, and so, of course, who was the most powerful entity during that time period? None other than the Catholic Church, right? So they're going to adopt this belief as well of geocentrism, the idea that the Earth is in the middle and that the planets go around it. Now, for a long, long time after that, that pretty much was science, okay? And the Middle Ages is going to keep enduring with it. Whereas then right when the Renaissance begins and the trigger of humanism starts, your scientific revolutionary thinkers come in and they begin to contest this, right? They begin saying, no, it's not epicycles because retrograde motion is an illusion, right? And it's also not perfect matter because one guy that we're going to talk about during our projects actually saw something explode in space. And he was like, actually, there's no way it's perfect if something is being born and dying, if it's chaotic, right? Galileo, for example, observed craters on the moon and he was like, stuff striking that bad boy all the time. That's a whole other place, right? Space is a whole other ethereal plane. It's not necessarily heaven. Perfect matter is not real. And epicycles don't make any sense either, right? And it's not going to be a knock on them. They're not saying that the natural philosophers were bad people and that they were like predicating negativity. It's just they didn't have the scientific structures that the scientific revolution actually comes along with. Now, the big thing that we're going to need to do, though, is when you come into class, okay, when you come into class on Monday, we are going to attack this project. What's going to happen is you're going to be assigned a scientific revolutionary thinker, right? And you're going to need to make a poster, okay, like a little simple poster, and y'all are going to present them and stuff like that, okay, like where you're going to have their basic ideas on it. Something that I actually wanted to do with this project is I actually went to Mr. Waterson and I talked about to him about it a little bit. We don't lose time talking about the scientific revolutionary thinkers, but when I stand up in front of you and talk about 10 different people and their ideas, you're going to maybe remember 5 of them. Whereas if y'all present to each other and actually teach it to each other with kind of like little bullet points and stuff like that, it's going to be a lot easier for you to remember, right? And it'll also be a little bit more fun because we're basically going to be creating their kind of loose dating profile. You're going to need to pick a modern day song that actually relates to their theories, and you're also going to come up with a pickup line for them as if they were trying to actually go on a date with somebody. What would they say using their thoughts and theories, right? So what you're going to need to do, though, before you come into class is go ahead and start trying to figure out who you want to partner up with, right? Well, remember, I got one group of 3, and I know y'all got a group chat to figure this out, okay? One group of 3, everybody else is in 2s. Go ahead and start figuring out who you're going to want to partner up with, and you're going to be creating a poster that's going to have the scientific revolutionary thinkers' name on it, the years they were active, their field of study, which is going to be a really big thing as well. It could be astronomy, medicine, general science, right? Something along those lines. And then every single one of you is going to need one crucial thing to be signed up for before you come into class, okay? You're going to need to have a ChatGPT account, okay? You're going to need to make sure you have a ChatGPT account that is actually like accessible while you're at school because we're going to use artificial intelligence to try and make it so we can actually create this summed up version of them, right? Like this summed up 4 bullet point version of all their thoughts and theories. Because what does happen from time to time is Mr. Terry gets carried away, right? I get carried away and I'll tell you the entire story of Galileo. But the AP test is never going to ask you, where is Galileo's middle finger, which is actually in a jar. And we'll talk about that when you come to class, right? So the thing about it, though, that we need to understand, though, is they're not going to ask that. They're going to ask you about his thoughts, his theories, and how he shook up European history, right? And then what we're going to do, though, is by doing this, and then we're going to present them on VooVoo Day, what that can actually afford us is then we're going to get that time back, so we'll stay on track for Napoleon, and hopefully for that, of course, that fun little field trip that we want to go on. But go ahead and kind of like keep that in mind. I have the poster, okay? I've got the paper. You don't need to bring that, but I need you to bring in the following stuff. That ChatGPT account, have it signed up. an idea of who you want to partner up with, all right? And then bring in any markers, pencils, rulers, or any kind of that crafty stuff that y'all love to use. I love stickers. Big fan of glitter. My wife loves glitter, okay? She's going to be a big fan to hear about that. But the thing about it is go ahead and bring that stuff in. We'll review a little bit, and then we're attacking this project, and you'll have plenty of time to get it done, okay? But I'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a good one.